Welcome back. You're watching WION World is One, and this is WION's continuous coverage of the US presidential race. Getting you the latest at this point of time. Early leads and victories have begun being registered. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have both opened their account in this action-packed presidential race. Donald Trump has won Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia, all Republican strongholds. The three states have 23 electoral votes in total. On the other hand, Kamala Harris has won Vermont. That accounts for 3 electoral votes at this point of time. Georgia, a crucial battleground state in this year's election season, which also falls under the blue wall state, extremely important to win the White House, is seeing a seesaw battle between both the contestants, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Earlier, we had Harris leading on the Georgian ticket, and now we have Trump, who is leading Georgia by 11%. All right, for all those tuning into WION World is One, latest leads and trends coming in is that Donald Trump is leading in Georgia. He has won Indiana and Kentucky. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris has won Vermont, and she is also leading in North Carolina, which was essentially a Republican base because 10 out of the 12 U.S. presidents have won the state of North Carolina. Well, for more on this, we have with us our correspondent Susan Tehrani joining us live from New York. Hi, Susan. We have early trends coming in that Donald Trump has taken a lead in Georgia, an essential battleground state, which also has 1/3 of African Americans. The state is seeing a seesaw at this point of time. Your assessment, your early thoughts, because it does look like that Harris perhaps was not able to make inroads between the Latinos and the African American voters in that very crucial battleground state.
Yeah, that's such a valid point, and that is the concern right now with Georgia and the African-American vote. There are a lot of first-time African-American voters in Georgia who went to the polls. Polls tell us that they decided to vote for the former president as opposed to Harris, although it's too soon to call Georgia and North Carolina. But as you rightly noted, with the percentage of points, votes that have been counted for, it looks like the former president is ahead in Georgia, and in North Carolina, it's Kamala Harris. Of course, as expected, Vermont went to Kamala Harris. Bernie Sanders also got another 4 years, for the 4th year, got elected. West Virginia, Kentucky, and Indiana go to former President Donald Trump. West Virginia was also interesting that it leaned towards the former president, but voting has now closed in many other states as well. It's just a little past 8 p.m. Eastern, and we're seeing a dozen other polling stations across the country, notably here on the East Coast, closed. A lot of them really detrimental in figuring out who will ultimately become the next president of the United States. But I think right now our story is that those minorities in Georgia seem to have not come out for Kamala Harris.
Right, Susan, just to add to the point you made there that the minorities have not come out to support Harris. Latest trends showed that 44% of Georgians live under poverty, and the larger portion of that are the African Americans. So Harris, perhaps if she wants to change the trend in Georgia at this point of time, because Trump is leading at 12%, she needs a coalition of Black, Hispanic and women voters, while Trump needs to retain the white voter base and make inroads into the traditional Democrats, which perhaps is what is happening in Georgia at this point of time. Taking the point of battleground states forward, Harris has taken a lead in North Carolina with 4%. Now, North Carolina has been a Republican base in the past because it has chosen 10 out of 12 times it has chosen Republicans. Talk to us about what changed this time around. Was it the 38% of the undecided voters that have tilted towards the blue camp?
Yeah, you do see really a tilt towards the blue camp. I will be very cautious because we can't really either call Georgia or North Carolina for either candidate. These are very early numbers that are coming in. We don't even have like 50% of the votes counted yet. And so, you know, they're very big states and they go county by county. And so, you know, we do have blue counties in North Carolina. However, as you mentioned, it's not just a sweeping victory for Donald Trump. And I think that's where the concern is for the Republicans. How Kamala Harris was able to, make inroads and have this lead right now, I think it goes back to the issue of women coming out and voting for her. We'll have to wait and see if really those numbers, big numbers that we heard about women coming out for Kamala Harris are really going to be accurate. But it appears that in states like North Carolina and others, the issue of abortion and women's rights really played a very important role, despite the fact that, they do lean conservative. There are a lot of women, even independent women, who weren't very comfortable with the issue of abortion going back to states.
Right, Susan, you made that valid point there, because abortion topped the concerns in the state of North Carolina, and I think Harris has tapped on that very issue. But like you mentioned, it's too early to call, because Harris is only leading by 12% in the battleground state of North Carolina. Stay with us, because we also have with us Stephen Golub, who is a lawyer and a political analyst. He's joining us live from California. Welcome to WION, Mr. Golub. Now, we have early trends coming in. And the polls have closed in some swing states as well, like Georgia, which had at least 4 million early mail-in ballots. We have seen in the past that both the camps have campaigned to the fullest in the swing states. But do you think that the penultimate issue right now is the turnout, which perhaps can affect which way the mandate goes, either Trump or Harris?
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for having me. Turnout is crucial. Harris is trying to generate turnout mainly through a very ambitious nationwide effort, mobilizing really millions of volunteers for door knocking, for knocking on doors, or for many hundreds of thousands of volunteers to knock on doors or to make phone calls. Trump, in contrast, has delegated that role to some political allies, Elon Musk being the leading example, who's put $100 million or more into the effort to pay people to go door knocking and perhaps make phone calls. Which effort works out better remains to be seen, but there's some reason to believe that the volunteer effort can be more effective, because it's easier and there's more of an incentive for people who are paid to do this, as the Republicans are doing, to maybe scam the system, claim that they've knocked on doors when they haven't. The other overlapping issue, as you've already touched on, is the gender gap. Many more women voting for Harris than for Trump, and vice versa. Many more men voting for Trump than Harris. For the men, it may be concerns about the economy, maybe a certain macho appeal for Trump. For women, it's abortion, but not just that. Trump and his allies have made some very derogatory and even vulgar statements about women historically, and especially in the past few weeks. So there's a concern about women's status and rights on the part of some men, but especially for women. And the initial returns from before today indicated a higher than normal margin of women voting, which could be good news for Harris. The one other thing I want to briefly mention is to reinforce Susan's excellent point that we shouldn't jump to conclusions yet based on a smattering of returns from states. A 4% return from North Carolina that shows Harris ahead really means nothing.
Right, and latest trends coming in is that Harris is 11% up in North Carolina. Taking that point you made there on the abortion rights forward with our correspondent Susan Tehrani. Susan, earlier we were talking about something known as the paradoxical voters who clearly are tilted towards the blue camp, towards Harris when it comes to abortion, reproductive rights. But when it comes down to voting and to economy and immigration, they clearly vote for Trump, because latest trends are showing that 30% of Americans feel that economy is one of the top issues on the ballot, followed by 36%, which is the state of democracy.
Yeah, that was those exit polls that initially came out right after the early states closed voting was really interesting. In a couple of them, I noticed that even democracy was ahead of the economy. And then there was one with Fox and AP that sort of had economy above democracy, but it was just these two issues, and then the issue of immigration and how much involvement do you want the government in your life, and abortion that came after those. Healthcare costs was also up there as well. But the issue of democracy and economy really were the main issues that voters were concerned about. And again, it just shows how close this race is when it comes to the issue of democracy. At least the polls that we saw before the election and up to election day today was that they trust Kamala Harris regarding that. And when it comes to the economy, they trust Donald Trump. So again, a very tight race, neck and neck. Even the exit polls indicate that Americans are very, they're very divided on what's important to them.
Right, Susan. Mr. Golub, coming to you, how do you think that the blue and the red camp have fared when it comes to key economic issues like economy, immigration, abortion, even foreign policy, which has been on the ballot? What do you think has resonated the most amongst the Americans?
Well, again, to follow up on Susan's point, I think according to these early exit polls, maybe we should take them with a grain of salt. Democracy seems to be the #1 issue, which I'm a little bit surprised by, given what had been going on earlier in the campaign. But Harris has really been hammering home on Donald Trump as a threat to democracy. In a sense, he's reinforced her point by talking about bringing in the military, arresting opponents, suspending the Constitution on day one, and things like that. And on top of that, you have a number of leading national security officials, really hundreds of them, and Republicans and conservatives signing on to public letters citing Trump as a threat to democracy, the Constitution, and national security, and backing Kamala Harris. And those ranks include former Republican conservative Vice President Dick Cheney and his daughter, former Congressperson Liz Cheney. So maybe that point is sinking in very powerfully. Beyond that, yes, I think the economy is still very big. In some polls, Harris has closed the gap with Trump to some extent, or even closed it entirely in terms of who's trusted more. Immigration seems to have faded a bit as an issue, according to certain polling, but that remains to be seen, to be clear on that. And again, abortion and women's rights, I think, is a very, very big issue for reasons I already alluded to.
Mr. Golub, you speak of how democracy is on the ballot, and that is what is one of the top concerns amongst the American voters. But it does look like that Trump has somewhat veered into the black men voters and even Latino voters, because we have seen, and that is also one of the top concerns amongst the blue camp. They're skeptical if Harris will be able to maintain the lead amongst the black Americans, like how Biden did in 2020, and also they are extremely worried in the decline amongst the Latino voters when it comes when it comes to Latino voters supporting Harris.
Yeah, that's a big concern, and legitimately so. Why there's that shift may depend on people thinking, some black men and Latino men thinking that, well, maybe Trump is better for the economy. Some could be, and now I'm not saying this applies specifically to black and Latinos, but this applies across the board to all ethnicities, including whites. There could be Trump is generating a certain macho appeal to men, and that's why part of why he's got such an edge. There is a bit of a counterbalance going on in terms of greater white support in certain areas for Harris than she previously had. And there is also, when we're talking about an important subset of Latinos, there was an outpouring of Puerto Rican fury against Trump for a comedian at Trump's recent New York rally making very derogatory comments, including calling Puerto Rico something like a floating garbage dump, which has generated some real pushback, including a lot of Puerto Rican celebrities who have a lot of influence in their community, with Pennsylvania having more than about 300,000 Puerto Rican voters. That could really turn out to be a significant factor.
Right, absolutely, Mr. Golub. Coming to you, Susan, how do you think misinformation has played a role this time around in the election season? How has that impacted the American voters when it comes to the U.S. presidential race?
Yeah, I think the American voter is very savvy, perhaps a lot more savvier this time around, considering misinformation and disinformation, and with really AI everywhere. People are getting their news from different outlets. Still, we are seeing how difficult it is to sort of look through all of the news that we're getting to try to find, what is true and what is not. And with the advent of social media, then it just becomes harder and harder. I would caution, however, against this Russian disinformation that we're hearing about once again from intelligence communities. And the reason for that is because there is, and mostly among Trump supporters and Republicans and some independents that I talk to, there is a sense of distrust about outside interference, which is unfortunate because it is real. We know it's real, but there's a sense of distrust on where this misinformation and disinformation is coming from. And once the issue of, a place like Russia comes in, then a lot of the Republicans and those that support the former president really just bring it back to the issue of the Steele dossier and how, there was Russia interference against the former president on the part of the former president. So that's really interesting to see that even though if those actors are involved, it's very hard to convince a certain part of the population that those are valid threats. But in terms of, what's going on online, I think it's clear to see that it's just so difficult to try to sometimes differentiate what's news, what's real, and what's not. But I think that people have grown more savvy. They're more aware because, again, as Stephen said, I was shocked as well that, democracy is on the ballot to an extent that in some exit polls, it's even before the economy. So really, it says a lot.
Right, Susan. It is quite close, democracy and economy, the top two issues on the ballot. News just coming in is that the Republican contestant, Donald Trump, has taken a slow lead in Georgia. Now he's down to 12%. Earlier it was touching almost 30%. Coming to you, Mr. Golub. You're also joining us live from California, and lots happening in the U.S. at this point of time. Apart from the presidential race between Harris and Trump, California is also voting for the Senate race. Talk to us about that, because pollsters are saying that Republicans have more than 60% chance of winning the Senate, especially with Joe Manchin retiring. It's more like a neck and neck, 50-50 seats in the House, in the U.S. House of Senate.
Yes, just very briefly on this disinformation issue, though, you don't have to look very far for disinformation circulating in plain sight. At the last debate, the debate with Kamala Harris, Trump came out and said that Ethiopian immigrants who happen to be legal in the city in Ohio are stealing and eating people's dogs and cats, and then doubled down on it. His vice presidential candidate doubled down on it afterwards by kind of ceding, well, maybe that's not exactly true, but the bigger point, whatever that is, in terms of anti-immigrant sentiment holds true. So there's a lot going on. I guess I'm a little bit less optimistic than Susan about people being able to filter out disinformation. In terms of the Senate, yeah, I mean, I would guess that there's better than the 60% chance of Republicans taking back control of the Senate. Right now, Democrats have a two-senator edge, 51-49 in effect. By virtue of, it's almost by virtue of chance, there are a lot more Democratic senators who are vulnerable running this time around during this election cycle, 34 out of them, out of the total of 100, than in other election cycles. So that puts them in kind of a politically dangerous spot. We still could get some surprises, but right now, my guess would be, yeah, at least a 60% chance or more that the Republicans emerge from this election with the Senate majority.
On that immigration point, Mr. Golub, and I'll come to you, Susan, later as well. Immigration and economy, especially immigration, has been one of the rallying points for the red camp. And it does look like that whatever Trump has said has perhaps resonated amongst the Americans. So what do you have to say on that, Mr. Golub?
Oh, I have to say it's sad. America is a nation of immigrants. A lot of the people who are resenting immigrants now, their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents came over as immigrants, and there were people back then saying the same thing that Donald Trump is saying, that immigrants take away jobs, that they're horrible criminals and the like. That happens to not, by and large, be true. The crime rate, for example, among immigrants, including illegal immigrants, is lower than it is among regular Americans. And I'll just add my particular hope, given my respect and affection for the Indian people, that this doesn't affect members of your audience, because when Trump has his lead immigration advisor, saying, a fellow named Stephen Miller, saying America is for Americans and Americans only, that's code for his white Christian nationalist base to say it's only for whites. That's what America is for. And it's horrible, but this could affect Indians and Indian immigrants, or would-be Indian immigrants, and Indian Americans as well, both in terms of maybe official policies of screening out Indian immigrants, but also just by setting a tone that allows bigotry to be on the surface much more than it used to be.
Right, Susan, your point on that, on the point of immigration that Mr. Golub has made, and especially also touch upon the fact on the key concerns amongst the Indian Americans, because it does look like that they are not leaning either towards the Harris camp or the Trump camp.
Yeah, in terms of immigration, I think the issue that the voters that I talk to, even here in New York, is they have a problem with border security right now. And that sort of ties in to the issue of immigration that we see on top of people's minds and in the polls. And considering the fact that, you know, New York right now has to house so many illegal migrants, there is that sense that some things are being taken away from New Yorkers, and those immigrants. I'm a first-generation American, for example, that came here legally with their families and worked really hard, and then is sort of handed to the migrants that come across the border, whether as asylum seekers or whatnot. And then that sort of ties into criminal activities, whether or not cartels are involved. And I think the former president has been able to really capitalize on that. That resonates with many people, even those independent voters that I talk to. You know, the issue of immigration, I think, is a cause for concern. Sidan was talking to a lot of Indian Americans in Washington, D.C. For Indian Americans, again, and the ones that I talk to, they're concerned about illegal immigration, because a lot of them are law-abiding citizens. They came to this country legally. And so they have immigration and economy on top of their minds. Now, how they view immigration, as Stephen said, you know, there are many people that see this issue as being very dangerous when it comes to the Trump camp on how they want to deal with immigration. But then you have those that support the former president because they just want more border security.
Right, Susan. News just coming in is that polls have closed in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. Coming to you, Mr. Golub, as of now, Trump is leading in the battleground state of Georgia by 11%. Meanwhile, Harris is leading in North Carolina by 6%. Do you think that this time around, the highly contested state of Pennsylvania, extremely important for the race to the White House, the blue wall state, will it come down to that? Because pollsters are suggesting that it's a neck-and-neck battle in the state of Pennsylvania with 49% each for Harris and Trump.
Oh, yeah, it could well come down to Pennsylvania. It's too early to be sure. It could be that Pennsylvania goes for one candidate and the other candidate nonetheless comes out on top. But Pennsylvania, by virtue of having the most electoral votes, being so tight, is particularly crucial. And it's one reason, frankly, in terms of what's going on in America right now, the country is really stressed out. And maybe the one thing that unites us is how stressed out people on both sides of the divide are, because they feel that so much is at stake, with Pennsylvania being maybe the top focus heading into this election. And because vote counting in Pennsylvania may be slower in other states, we probably won't know tonight. We may not know for a day or two, or if it's very, very close, maybe even longer than that.
Right, Susan, coming quickly to you, if Harris wins Pennsylvania, her chances of winning the White House is 90%, similar with Trump as well. And the demographics of the state of Pennsylvania is quite unique. The question being that will the Latino voters vote for Harris? Because we have been seeing a decline in the voter base for Harris when it comes to the Latino voters and the Black American men voters.
Yeah, that's true in some ways with the Hispanic and Latino voters and minority voters, for example, Muslims in Michigan as well. Something that they said that broke them from the Harris camp was some traditional and conservative values that they had. And they thought perhaps that, the Democrat Party might be leaning to the left and not so much to the center when it comes to their family values and traditional values that they perceive to be important, raising children here in the United States. And again, the former president was able to capitalize on that, just not by being a Republican, but then he sort of talked about these grievances among those communities as well, and that resonated. When it comes to black men, it's interesting that that has been really an issue that even, someone like Barack Obama really tried to bring them in and talk to them, reason with them why they should vote for Kamala Harris. I'm not sure if that was effective or not, but then after that, Michelle Obama, mentioned the black men and how their wives should talk to them. So, yeah, this is a demographic that's really important, not only for the Trump camp, but for the Harris camp. But I don't know. Ultimately, I think the black vote does lean Democrat. I mean, the gap might be smaller this time around, but I think the majority of the African-American population votes Democrat.
Right, Susan, which is also the concern amongst the blue camp, if Harris will be able to maintain that support that Biden had amongst the black American voters. Coming quickly to you, Mr. Golub, we have to slip into a short break, but are you expecting any surprises this time around?
Yes, but I don't know what the surprises are. There'll definitely be some surprises in terms of maybe a given state or a given demographic or a given factor playing out. To the extent that there may be a surprise for Harris, it could be how overwhelming women's support for her could be that could put her over the top. And maybe the same thing for Trump on the other side, that there may be an even higher pro-Trump turnout among men than we're even expecting. Now, having said that, a group that Trump is appealing to, young men, have a history of not turning out to vote. So, that's as surprising as I can get. But the big surprise will be the surprise that at least I can't predict.
Right, Mr. Golub, thank you so much, Mr. Stephen Golub, and our correspondent Susan Tehrani on joining us on the show at this point of time. The situation seems to be extremely volatile and fluctuating, but we'll of course be tracking the polls very closely with the both of you.